Anybody, anywhere,
It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen.
This pass caught by Paulsen, the tight end.
And from 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen.
Welcome into Take Command with Logan, who spent a decade in the NFL. I'm Grant Paulsen. You can listen to me on 106.7 The Fan from 2 to 6:30 every single day. Watch the show. We're on YouTube. Logan's in the Cape right now. I am out in Ashburn. You can see the practice fields off in the distance back behind me. But let's start with the offensive line. There's some shuffling going on. Matt Gulbin, the late-round pick center who's been third on the depth chart with Allegretti hurt, maybe starting to push Julian Good-Jones a little bit for that center 2 spot, getting some first-team reps yesterday at practice. Dan Quinn coming out saying he wanted to see him working kind of up the ladder on the depth chart a little bit. But that all speaks to something you and I have been discussing, which is the offensive line in general. How do we feel right now about the O-line, which has become a major point of consternation, not just with some of the fears fans had going in, but then a 3-play sequence for the starters where there was 2 pressures and a sack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not that worried about the 3-play sequence. Like, we've talked about that a little bit, like, over the course, reviewing the game, basically. And, yeah, like, so does that feel good to see that? No, but do I think it's something to be, like, worried about? Also, no. Like, there's been times in the preseason in the past, like, where I've watched other teams or I've been on a team where it's like, hey, man, that wasn't very good. And then week 1, you kind of figure it out, like whether it's the preparation, whether it's like some guys just don't treat the preseason that seriously. And I'm not saying that's what they're doing here, but like it's different. It's the preseason. It's a glorified practice. The game's coming around now. I do think it's the injury stuff with the offensive line is something that is a little bit concerning. Like, obviously the Laramie Tunsil thing is big because I think it kind of just weakened the whole left side of the offense, right? Allegretti not practicing is another one that I always get a little bit nervous about because it's like, hey, man, like one of the things your superpower, right, is your intelligence and your experience. You can't display that, right? You can't cultivate that. You can't sharpen that blade necessarily if you're on the sideline. So that's concerning. And then I think also, like, one of the things that you're looking at here now is what is the depth look like on the interior? Like, I think we've talked about Trent Scott. You feel good about him. Wiley, you feel good about him. It's the interior depth. And so now I think, like, with Gulbin getting some reps with the 1 yesterday, you kind of say to yourself, okay, like, they are looking to see who can be that swing interior piece. Like, he's getting reps at guard. He's getting reps at center. And I think when he's done stuff at center, I think he's done pretty good. I think he's got good play strength. He's got good feel, like all those things you want to see. But part of this is, like, you're trying to decide who's going to be that 9th guy in the rotation, that 8th guy in the rotation. And I think it's just it's a difficult position because of the injury and the health of the group at the moment, I think.
I wonder what you would say to kind of the general consensus on the personnel right now. Because I happen to be with you on the 3 plays and the 2 pressures and that disconnect between, like, what I would consider a plugged-in person who can kind of explain what's happening right now and a fan who's just working back from a result. But here's where I may be a little bit more with the populace, and I want to know what you would say about this. At left tackle, I actually happen to be very high on Brandon Coleman. You know that I've liked him more than most people all along. So it's funny to say this, but after the Tunsil injury, where I wish Tunsil was here, I still don't feel that bad about left tackle, all right? Left guard, Chris Paul was a free agent, hit the market, and had very little interest in terms of teams paying him money to start, which kind of gave me a little bit of pause. He came back here at like 98 cents on the dollar on the cheap, and I'm like, all right, well, maybe he's not what I think he is. I also think in camp, you started to hear rumblings, maybe Coleman's going to start over him. Like, where are we with Chris Paul? So I think I'm going to put a question mark there. Then at center, you've talked about Allegretti's injuries. He's come back. He's practiced like 2 or 3 times all camp. Dan Quinn just said this morning at his press conference, we're recording this on Tuesday, that Allegretti's out for another week, maybe something like that. So, like, it looks like you're talking about he's not going to do anything in the joint practice. He's not playing in the game. Now you're back to, like, early next week before he's doing anything again. So you're basically, like, missing over a month with him at that point. So center, major question mark. Right guard, Cosme, put him in the Pro Bowl. Like, I think he looks awesome. And then right tackle, and maybe this is where there's a little disconnect with me and some. I loved the Connerly pick. I still love the potential of Connerly. But, like, watching him out here, I'm not confident that he's going to hit the ground sprinting, especially if you're dealing with, like, strong guys that can get under you and bull rush you a little bit. Like, I have some concerns. So that's 3 of 5 spots, none of which are left tackle where you don't have Tunsil. It's like
Right.
when I go through the individual players, what do you say to that?
I think that's the right way to look at it, honestly. Like, I think you feel good about Coleman, but he's not Laramie Tunsil, right? He's not a top 5 player at the position. And I think for as excited and as consistent I feel like as Coleman has been through practice, through 2025, like he's not the same guy that is hurt. And then you look at Chris Paul, and I think like the question mark there is warranted because like I kind of was getting to a point before the Tunsil injury where I'm like, oh, you're going to have Tunsil and Coleman, and then Allegretti's going to be at center, and you're going to get a bigger athlete in there who can kind of help Allegretti with some of these combinations and get into the combination quicker. Because but that being said, like I look at Chris Paul and I say to myself, like when you go back and watch the film from last year, like are there ups and downs? Sure, but I definitely think there's more good than there is bad. And I think he did it for a full calendar year. So the question mark to me is, I think, maybe slightly unwarranted, but I think maybe the question mark is applied to like the ceiling. Like with Coleman, you're like, man, maybe we get really rolling here. We've got this guy with this high athletic upside. And I feel like we know who Chris Paul is, but there is value to that. There's value to the consistency that he's brought to the position last year, which I think is important to acknowledge. The center thing is concerning, right? I mean, there's no other way to look at it. It's just concerning.
How much of Chris Paul playing at the level he did last year was based on Tunsil being next to him? That's what I keep coming back to. And I don't know. I'm just wondering. It's
a great question. I think because I think a lot of it, because I think Tunsil's just that good. Like there has been times where we've talked about it, like where they're running like ET stunts and, you know, Chris Paul gets a little bit over his skis and then Tunsil ends up blocking 2 guys. Like that happened multiple times this year, right? But there's also times where Chris Paul's on a double team and just like drives a guy 5 yards off the ball. Like I think you just got to know who he is as a play caller and as a coach and be like, okay, there are some physical limitations, but I think these are his superpowers and it's his strength and his power. Like he is a powerful dude. And so if you can kind of cultivate the offense, again, not around him, but around kind of what he does well, like I think they're going to be more of a gap scheme run than like, let's say Detroit, for example. They're still going to run the outside zone, but they're going to be more of a gap scheme run. I think that fits what he does well. So again, like I think I understand the question with Chris Paul, because I think the ceiling is somewhat in question, but I think the floor is set. And I think that there's value to that. But like to keep moving through the offensive line, the center one I'm having a hard time with at the moment. It just is tough. Like I think, you know, like when I've seen Good Jones play, there's times where I'm like, this is really good, but I also have questions about his overall play strength. When Gulbin plays, I don't have questions about his play strength, but I have questions about his maybe high-end athleticism. And then I can't even comment on Allegretti because like what I'm watching is 2 games from last year where I think he did a pretty good job. But again, we haven't seen it this year because the calf injury. So I think those things are that position is just there's just so many questions that haven't been answered.
I just don't think there's any way. If I was to have come up to them and said, hey guys, I just saw into the future. I got some info for you. Nick Allegretti is going to practice like 3 times between the start of camp and August 25th. There's no way that the rest of the depth chart is Good Jones and Gulbin. Like that's not how they would have done it. And if that's true, which is my opinion, then it just tells you they'd like to have somebody else on the roster. Now, why don't you call a Graham Glasgow or something? Maybe it takes money. Maybe that guy becomes your starter potentially. So like all of that is in play. But I just think we're in a phase now where maybe they know, if we know, they know, and they've got to wait till somebody gets cut. I think this is going to be your Noah Brown edition where they will bring in a veteran center who is cut this weekend, and that guy will be here practicing for a couple weeks and will be the backup to Allegretti. And in a world where he can't play in week 1, I don't think it'll be Good Jones. I don't think it'll be Gulbin. I think it'll be the guy that's got like 19 starts over the last 3 years that comes in here, whoever that is.
I mean, I think that's how I feel too. And again, like if you're trying to be glass half full, I think Good Jones has done some good stuff, right? I think you're like, oh, like this is like he's probably exceeded my expectations. But you've brought this up before. There's a reason that he hasn't ascended into that role, and I think there are some physical limitations to him that make it hard for him to be a full-time starting center. Now, if you had to, like, I think he could do it, and I just want to make sure that's very clear. But I agree with you. I think the guy that's going to be that kind of swing interior player is not on the roster currently. I think they're going to find somebody who, you know, they cut or whatever that's going to fill that position. And hopefully Allegretti's healthy because he's been here. He's been here the entire offseason. He knows the offense, the play calls. But I do think you just need to get a little bit more experience. You get a little bit more starting experience and like just a a better physicality at the position. So I think that's something that I would just keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, and I defer to you overall. I mean, I think people need to remember too, like you've made it pretty clear that the center position, in your opinion, is like maybe 5th in the pecking order on the O-line. So when you say they could get by with him or it could work out okay, you're not suggesting he's going to go be an all-pro at the most position on the offensive line. Like personally, I think that's a setup for a failure. And it's not about Good Jones per se. Like I don't mean that in some personal way. The 2 reps in all the years he's been in the league are kind of the evidence I need to know. But on top of that, I just keep looking at the division. Like week 1 is the Eagles, man. It's Davis and it's Carter. And then you've got Quinnen Williams after that. And, not long after that, you're playing Seattle's treacherous front. And I think about the Giants, the worst team in your division that you should actually beat at least once, if not twice. And they might have the best defensive line in its entirety that you face all year. So, it's just not – it doesn't work for me. The plan didn't really work for me in a world where Allegretti was hurt, and we're already here. But there's also a path to he's back, he's practicing, he plays in week 1, and he's healthy enough, and they're fine. I want to reiterate that. Real quick, you mentioned something I found interesting about the way they're going to operate their run game and how it could help Paul. I want to dive into something before we put a bow on the O-line really quick. The import of David Blau in insulating this group and helping them. When we talked about the preseason plays, you referenced you're running something, but maybe you prepare differently if this is the regular season or you're not running that into that front or whatever. How big a deal is that part of this for Blau, especially at center? And just let's say that Connerly gets off to a slow start or the O-line is a bit of an issue in this hypothetical. Now he's got to do some things differently. What can you do differently?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, I wanted to just make a point of clarification. When I say getting by with Good Jones, essentially you're surviving. And it's how long do you want to be existing in an environment where you have to survive? And I hate saying that about a player, but I was that player too for a lot of offense. It's we can survive Logan Paulsen being our starting Y for 6 weeks, 5 weeks, but we really want to make sure that, Jordan Reed is back here and making plays for this offense. So that's what I mean. It's just you could do it, but again, it's less than ideal. And again, that's not a knock on him. He's doing everything he can. He's playing really hard. But I think that's something I just wanted to kind of point out there in terms of nuance. So with regards to the run game, this is maybe the biggest outstanding question for the offense, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is because again, they've kind of come into these game plans with a somewhat vanilla approach, right? It's just been kind of we're going to run, our base install, kind of our base runs, nothing too crazy. But when you look at the best offensive coordinators in the league, this is something that I think is just generally slept on by most people in NFL media, most fan bases, is they're excellent at designing run games. They're very, very good at it. I think about being in meetings with Kyle and it's okay, this is our base run for this week. These 2 runs protect this run. If we get this kind of front, this is the check. If we get this 8-man box, and they're just so good at scaffolding responses and putting that group in good situation. And when you talk to people around the league about Ben Johnson, the first thing they say is watch him orchestrate a rushing attack. Watch him, kind of work in the specialty runs, watch him work in the base runs. He just has a great feel for designing and executing in terms of call the running game. And so I think David Blau has done some really innovative stuff. We got motions and shifts to help the quarterback identify coverage, address the defense. We've got, kind of check with me at the line of scrimmage. We've got under center. But to me, the feel of calling a run game is something that is very unique. And it does seem like it's correlated to some of the best offensive minds in the league. Same thing with Sean McVay. Same thing with Matt LaFleur. They know how to call a run game at a very high level. And we just have not, because of the current environment, we just haven't seen David Blau do that. Now, do I think he's perfectly capable? Sure. But that is a big lift. And so it comes back to that, your original question where it's yes, he can insulate that group, but has he shown that ability consistently? He just hasn't been given the opportunity. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect from him in that area, to be quite honest.
Take command with Logan Paulsen and Grant Paulsen. I want to make an observation and get your reaction to it next. I feel like the roster moves that they continually make tell me that they don't love an area of their team, and I want to see if you agree or disagree with that. That's next on Take Command. Welcome back to Take Command. He's Logan Paulsen. I'm Grant Paulsen out here in Ashburn today as the Commanders ramp up for their joint practice with the Baltimore Ravens this week and eventually a preseason game that likely none of their regulars are going to participate in. We'll get more word on that, or we won't probably as the week goes on. But that's my expectation. Logan, here's something that I keep coming back to. It seems to me like every 3 days they're signing like a defensive tackle who's played in the league. You know what I mean? Like they brought in this dude Cowart who has had this awesome camp. Now they brought in Maurice Hurst too, and he had 2 sacks in the game. And now Boogie Basham is being brought in, who's like a former first-round pick. It's like every couple of days it feels like they're bringing another guy in, and it's all at the same position. And I know you lost Johnny Newton for much of the season, but it's interesting to me because in the back of my head, and something we haven't talked about a lot on the show, I keep meaning to bring up, I wonder about stopping the run. And the conversation I actually wanted to have with you is more scheme related. Like that's the one sometimes against Flores with the Vikings, where like if you were ahead of the game script and downs and distances that were favorable, sometimes they are a little susceptible because they do want to get up the field, right? And they do want to be a pass rushing team. But I wondered, do you think this is evidence that they're not quite sold that they can stop the run well yet? Or is it more about Settle's been hurt, Newton's been hurt? Like they just don't have the bodies there, so they're just bringing in camp bodies, and they just happen to be guys that have long resumes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably part of it. And I also think when you bring people in at this time of year, you want to know what's available. You know, like you have your list of like priority free agents, and you want to know like, you know, I'm not saying they're going to cut anybody or whatever, but like you want to get eyes on them, kind of see what kind of condition they're in, see what kind of like how they are, how they approach the game. And so I think that's part of this too. The other thing I think that's important here is obviously the injuries are, I think, indicative of why they're bringing people in. And I think Jeffrey Mba tweaked his knee in the game. Now, I don't know if he's on any injury report, but he was in the blue tent on the sideline. So, like, if he's nicked up at all or won't be able to go, like, you need the appropriate depth there to get through training camp practices and joint practices and obviously the final preseason game. So, to me, it's more injury related, but I also think it is even though it is injury related, to your point, it's a good tool to kind of say, hey, like, can we identify people that can make this group better? If we do have injuries in season, we need to bring people in that need to play a lot of minutes for us. And I think that's also part of this process. So I think both can be true. I also think that, you know, one of the things when you watch the film, and I talk to Fletch about this all the time, because I tend to be a little bit more offensive minded, obviously, when I watch defensive film, is there is at moments like people are in the right gaps. They've gapped out the front well, but they're not as physical necessarily as they need to be. They're getting kind of moved off the spot. And so part of me wonders, to your point, if they are just looking for a more physical presence on the interior in certain instances to kind of, again, anchor a little bit better, and just like whether that comes from the player's experience or whether it comes from their kind of physical measurables, I'm not sure. But that's also something that could potentially be factoring in here.
All right, so in a world where we've talked about my concerns today, the offensive front and pass protection, and then maybe the ability to stop the run as everyone's trying to get up the field and rush the quarterback. And again, that's as much like a scheme-related thing as anything else. But I also kind of have my spidey senses up with all the D-tackle, big body types that they keep bringing in here. What's something that you're not as sold on or confident in? Maybe it's the same thing, but like where are you still needing to see more? If they played today, you'd be a little worried about blank.
I mean, anywhere, right? We can go anywhere.
Just in general on the team.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the center position. Like, I know we just talked about that for 15 minutes, but that's the one that is giving me a little bit of consternation. Like, again, like I think Good Jones has had a fine camp for what my expectations were for him. I think Gulbin has exceeded expectations, but he's a 6th round rookie. Like, do you feel comfortable with either one of those guys starting? So it kind of goes back to, again, that point we just made about finding somebody with a little bit more experience that can kind of hold the ship while Gulbin develops, while, you know, whatever you're looking for there in terms of backup. I think that's going to be really important. But honestly, like outside of that, I think I've been pretty pleased with the depth of the team. I think the other one would be running back, just because there's a couple injuries there at the moment. I don't think they're serious, but, you know, how close is Bill, to being ready for week 1? How close is Rashad White to be ready for week 1? I think those are good questions to ask, but I'm not that worried about them being healthy, I think.
To that point, today, Quinn was asked, about his confidence in Odafe Oweh and Trey Amos being ready for week 1. And he was completely non-committal. Now, you can read that however you want to. Like, he could also just be in regular season mode a little bit with injuries where he's not going to say anything. He basically kicked the can down the road to we'll know a little more a week from now. But if you knew those guys were playing, it would be a really easy thing to just kind of quell some concerns and say, oh, well, they're going to be back next week. We're going to have those guys ready for week 1. But that was not the answer. It was a little more kind of uncertain. And I do think there's a pile of guys now like that in a sense, right? Like, we haven't really gotten good intel on this Bill injury. A lot of people didn't even notice it. You know, I was talking about it right after practice because I think you had seen it. You'd come up to me too. And it was like, he definitely came up lame. They're calling it a lower body. So they haven't really said, is it a groin? Is it a hamstring? Is it a calf? Is it like, this isn't hockey, but that's what he said today. He's like, it's a lower body. He went full like Spencer Carberry on us. So like, I don't know. Is that a 2-day thing? We know he's not practicing this week. We know he's not playing this week. Is that potentially a 2 to 3 week thing? And now you're in jeopardy of missing week 1. I don't know. So the good news is they only have 2 right now, serious enough injuries that they're going to cost you much of the season. And that's obviously Tunsil and Johnny Newton.
Yeah, and so we'll see. I mean, again, my spidey sense says that the Bill thing's not that serious. The Odafe Oweh one is interesting. Again, like, we'll see where he's at. The one that really I find fascinating in kind of a macabre kind of way is the Trey Amos one, just because of like his timetable for this offseason. Like, you know, it was reported that it was a broken bone. Usually that's 6 to 8 weeks. Then he has this follow-up surgery at some point. And then, you know, he gets out onto the grass for like 1 day and then rolls his ankle or whatever happened. I'm not exactly sure. And so, you know, people are kind of relying on him to be purportedly relying on him to be kind of the number 1 corner for this group, but he hasn't practiced and he doesn't seem to be healthy. So that's one that I kind of forget about because he hasn't been out there. But, you know, I think that's a significant, again, I'm relatively confident Odafe Oweh is going to be back. I'm relatively confident Bill's going to be back. But the Trey Amos one is weird because there's been no really comment on it and there doesn't seem to be any positive movement. And so, like, I think you feel good about Amik Roberts. You feel good about, you know, Mikey Sanders still. But I think you and I, at least, were kind of counting on him to be a big part of that secondary, and he just hasn't been out there. So, you know, he's purportedly the most physically gifted. He's the most talented. He's the tallest. He's the strongest. But he hasn't practiced. So, like, what is the confidence level that he will have, like, an impact this year, especially early in the season? Like, that's diminishing as we get closer for me anyway.
Yeah, and he's their corner 1 on the depth chart in theory. That's the guy, to your point, with the biggest responsibility if he's healthy. All right, I want to go through some listener questions. We got some really good ones this week for a little mailbag here with camp winding down and the preseason about to come to a conclusion as well. So we'll hit as many of those as we can next on Take Command. Welcome back, Take Command. Let's hit a mailbag here at this point with some of the burning questions from listeners that have come in this week. Starting with, I found this one interesting. They want to know, how did the Bears have offensive success last year with subpar left tackle play, unlike the 49ers who usually struggle when Trent Williams is out? Which scenario is more likely for the Commanders without Tunsil? So just generally, if you lose a left tackle, if you've got an anchor of your offensive line, Washington can relate to that, that guy goes away. How do you mask that?
Yeah, I think it's all the stuff that, you know, we've talked about, like with the play action pass, the keepers, the chip help, moving the pocket, like the quick game. Those are all things that help out an effective running game. Those things are really important. I think also just understanding game flow as a play caller. That's another one that comes up. And so when you look at the Bears, you know, they I think they led the league in turnovers or interceptions or something like that last year. So they had a lot of bites at the apple. The offense was on the field a lot. As a play caller, you don't need to be as aggressive. I think those things all kind of factor in, quite honestly, to insulating the left tackle. And when you look at San Francisco, just as a point of comparison, like they really leverage that position when Trent's in there. So the offense is kind of built around him being there. And when he's not there, it's like they have a hard time adjusting out of it, kind of. So
Kyle's got his Trent Williams playbook and then his Trent Williams playbook. And that one's not as big or as interesting, you know. But that's a good point by you, by the way, on Kyle builds it that way and Ben Johnson doesn't. I also think the takeaways was a big deal for the Bears last year.
Huge deal.
Carry over 30-plus takeaways last year. Like you said, number 1 in the league. I mean, that changes everything. And that's not only a sustainable year-to-year metric. Here's a question. We'll stick with the theme of the injuries today. Someone wants to know, I'd love to get Logan's insight on the responsibilities of an injured player. Obviously, Tunsil gets paid $30 million a year. A lot of veteran guys who come to a place, they'll later in their career, you get hurt, you're not around. He's already said, by the way, he's going to. But he wants to know, like, do they become the highest paid assistant coach in history, or like, are they having input in the room? Like, when a guy's hurt, how often are they heard from and around?
Usually not a lot, to be quite honest with you, like, because they kind of are on their own schedule. Like, he's going to get surgery. He's got to get in for his rehab time. The rehab time is different than like when the rest of the team's getting rehab. It's usually during practice at some point or during meetings. And again, like, Laramie's been around, like, which is kind of unusual, which I think is cool that he's kind of made that commitment to help the guys out, even though he's not practicing. But your schedule now becomes about getting healthy and finding ways to maximize your rehab. So traditionally not around a lot. Like, even guys that are like big time contributors to the organization, like, when they get hurt, they kind of, I won't say they disappear because they're around a little bit, but they're definitely not there as much as you'd expect. Because again, like, your goal is to get healthy, and right, wrong, and different. That's usually how the NFL operates.
I like these. We got two of these, and I've got some thoughts on this as well, but I'll tee you up first. So I'll read them both because they're similar. They say, Grant, you talk a lot about how certain players are going to be great on the practice squad. How confident are we that these guys make splash plays in the preseason and then get to the practice squad? He's talking about Jaden Bradley here. Says he can see the case, but even then, last year I think he makes the 53. We had terrible wide receiver depth. Is there not another team in the NFL that has bad wide receiver depth where he would be the fifth or the sixth guy? Should you risk losing him? Another person here asks, do you think it's too risky to get Jaden Bradley to the practice squad, or could we see another Mitch Tinsley situation with center? Would you be able to rotate JGG and Gulbin until Allegretti is back? So different question there. But on Jaden Bradley, like, I always think the fear of these guys getting grabbed is way bigger than the chance of them getting grabbed.
Yeah.
Just having done this now for 25 years, I've spent hours talking about how you can't get Lake Seastrunk to the practice squad, or Marcus Mason or Marco Mitchell. I mean, 95% of the time they get to the practice squad. And my point is always, is there some risk? I guess. If Jaden Bradley gets claimed, does it change anything really about the season? Like, I like Jaden Bradley. I want him in the building. It's just not a game changer. It's not really. It's like, okay, I'm not losing sleep over that. I got two other receivers that I really like on my practice squad. Jacoby Jones being one of them, and I can go find another guy like him. So it's just never an issue for me. I'm not going to cut a player at another position that I know I'm going to play so that I don't risk losing him.
Yeah, so I think I should have done this. I didn't know this was a question, but sometimes I'll go through and I'll check in the division, like training camp reports, just read through them. And literally every team has a Jaden Bradley, like a guy that is balling in training camp with the threes, like just making a ton of plays. And, oh my gosh, how are we going to get him to practice squad? And most times teams want the player that they're most familiar with, right? So they want the guy that's in the building. They're not going to like let him go or whatever. And the other thing too about practice squad is, like, you have a right to match technically, right? So, like, let's say you get an offer to be taken off a practice squad. The team can match that offer, or they can elevate you to 53. Like, that's a way to kind of protect the asset. So if it's really important to you to keep them around, like, there's like practice squad minimum salary or whatever. Like, let's say, oh, I get a call from Dallas and I want to go be on their practice squad. The team can just be like, hey man, actually, no, we'll offer you double your pay if you want to stay. And most guys will stay because it's familiar, it's comfortable, they're getting paid more money. So with players like that, I think it's something that the team can operate in a way where they can protect that asset if they want.
In season, that's definitely how it works. I remember James Davis, that happened with the Clemson running back when you played, where teams kept trying to sign him and Washington would up his salary to keep him around. I feel like, though, at training camp, like when you cut all your guys.
Because you're on waivers, right? Is that right?
They're on waivers, so they can be plucked. And I don't know that you have the ability to say, hey, we actually want you more, we'll pay you more. I'll double check on and mention it on the next pod. But in season, it's a great point. Once you get a guy to the practice, you can't keep them for more money.
So, yeah, but the other one too, like, so for example, so in my rookie year, 2010, I went in, I had a meeting with Mike Shanahan, and they were like, hey, we're going to put you on practice squad. And I was like, this is great. So there's a practice that day, right? And so I went, and I remember I walked, and I was getting, lunch at the Cheesecake Factory with my boy Eric Cook, and we were hanging out and having a great old time. And during that time, I got a couple calls. Like one was from the Dallas Cowboys about like whether I was released. They were talking to my agent, whatever. By the end of that lunch, I got a call from Bruce Allen, and I thought this was a joke, by the way. I almost didn't answer the phone, saying, "Hey, man, you're on the 53," because they thought Dallas was going to sign me once off waivers. So again, even then, there's ways that you can insulate players that you really, really like. And like, let's say, for example, like at the time they cut a veteran offensive lineman who they felt was a free agent for a couple of weeks afterwards, who, like, let's say they really wanted to play a game, like they could have elevated me to the 53, then they could have cut me 2 days later. They could have elevated that person back to the 53. Like, there's ways to kind of dance around this if you really want to protect a player.
I don't remember that. So did you actually get cut for a day, or they not filed the paperwork yet?
So I don't think that's a good question. Like, I don't know exactly how the logistics went. I have to ask my agent if I ever actually cleared waivers or actually ever got to waivers. But that's the story. Is like, I remember getting calls from certain teams, and it was like all of a sudden, "Hey, you're on the 53," and I was like, "Whoa, this is unbelievable." So.
And for people that don't realize what that means for you coming out of school, like financially, the difference back then had to be, I think this could be wrong, but I feel like practice squad was like 80-some thousand at that point.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And rookie min was like 350, 360, something like that. So yeah, it was a big pay bump.
You're like, you get that call at the cheese factory. You're like, bring some more food over. Come on.
Yeah.
You want to
Drinks are on me, boys. Come on.
Did Cook make the practice squad that year?
He did make the practice squad that year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he got elevated later that year and played a little center versus Carolina, which was good for him. So
a center? What's he doing now? They might need to call him.
Talk about just a freaky, just weird body for center. He was like 6'6", almost 6'7". He was like 350, 340. Like, this is just a enormous body playing center. So very unique.
Take command. I'm going to wrap because I'm headed out to go grab Terry McLaurin after practice. I know you got a lot going on in the Cape. We're going to be back with some thoughts going into a preseason game against the Ravens after a joint practice in Baltimore. Next time you hear from us. Thanks for your questions. As always, you could send them in at Grant Paulsen on Twitter, Grant H. Paulsen on Instagram, or drop comments wherever you get your audio, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. Spread the word. Take command 3 times a week. We drop one for you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For producer Evan and Logan, I'm Grant saying so long.